arts before. I'm thrilled you're spending your Monday evening. Is it Monday? No. It must be summertime. I'm losing track of days. I'm thrilled you're spending your Tuesday evening with us. This library is a special library. It's one of the largest archives of performing arts material in the world. And in addition to that, we like to say that this is a place where Lincoln Center's commitment to artistic excellence intersects with the New York Public Library's commitment to access and community learning. This will be the 226th free public program that's been presented at this library since this time last year. Oh, thanks. But I think this one is a special one. Don't you guys think so? I've been looking forward to it because it's rare that we get a chance to work with so many wonderful partners. The library really cherishes an opportunity when we have a chance to work with Dance NYC. Are you guys Dance NYC fans? Woo! Yes. And we have such a great relationship with Lincoln Center's Access Services, which they're just an amazing team. And I'm so grateful that I have a chance to work with them on this program. And of course, all of our Lincoln Center partners, from Lincoln Center Out of Doors to the Atrium, which is here. It's just a wonderful chance for us to have a bit of a family gathering here at the library, and I'm thrilled that you guys can be a part of it. And I'm especially grateful to the Mertz Gilmore Foundation for supporting this kind of project. It means a lot to us. Tonight is sort of a two-part evening. We're going to have this wonderful conversation here in the cafe. And then we have a really special opportunity to actually participate in the creative process along with Heidi Latsky after this with a workshop based on her wonderful piece on display. So thank you so much for being here. I want you guys to do one more thing for me, which is give an incredible, rousing welcome to the Executive Director of Dance NYC, Lane Harvey.
Thank you, Evan, for welcoming us to the library and to the Lincoln Center campus. I'm doubly honored this evening to be here first as Executive Director of Dance NYC and second as a committee member for the Dance Division at the Public Library. I am thrilled by the division's strengthened emphasis both on archiving the disability arts and on also activating public dialogue of the sort we're going to engage in tonight. Tonight, we are here to launch a new conversation series organized around the performances of grantees of Dance NYC's Disability Dance Artistry Fund, established with support from the Ford Foundation and additional support by the Mertz Gilmore Foundation. By investing in dance made by and with disabled artists, we aim to advance artistic excellence and innovation, and by extension, disability rights. The evening is comprised of a discussion with Heidi Latsky Dance and representatives from Lincoln Center, followed by a master class. The discussion will be moderated by Kevin Gotkin, who is co-director of the arts advocacy group, Disability Arts NYC, and Dance NYC is a proud founding member of this group. I have just a couple of logistical notes and thanks to offer before we begin. First, and I don't have the clicker, but the first note is that you are on camera. The library is filming this session for archival purposes, and we are also taking photographs. Second, please help us engage a wider audience online using the handle @DanceNYC and the hashtags Disability Dance Artistry and Townhall on your social media posts. And third, there will be a question and answer session later this evening. And if you would prefer to post your question by email, please write ddatownhall@dance.nyc with your name and your question. I'd like to thank all of our partners tonight, especially the library, Lincoln Center, and the Accessibility Office. and for its leadership support of the conversation series we're launching tonight, the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation, and all of the funders of Dance NYC's Disability Dance Artistry Initiative. For their support of our programs, I also want to thank the National Endowment for the Arts, which is so vital to the arts ecology and must not be diminished. The State Council on the Arts and the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs. It is an enormously exciting time for the city, which has just released Create NYC, its first ever cultural plan, and made an explicit commitment to advancing the disability arts. This commitment is unprecedented locally and nationally and should have a ripple effect in policy and funding circles. I just want to acknowledge that the recommendations of this plan certainly respond to recommendations from Dance NYC research and advocacy, but also so many of the partners that we have with us tonight, Disability Arts NYC and many of you. So thank you for that work, which must continue. And finally, I want to thank the Dance NYC staff and volunteers working behind the scenes, the extraordinary programs director, Alejandra Duques Fuentes, and equally extraordinary equity and inclusion coordinator, Hannah Jew. And with that, to introduce the main event, I'd like to welcome Jill Sternheimer, who's Director of Programs here at Lincoln Center. Thank you all for being with us, and enjoy the night.
Thank you so much. Hi, everybody. I'm Jill Sternheimer. I'm the Director of Public Programming at Lincoln Center. You're giving me a big raise to say that I'm the Director of all programs. I'm just the Director of Public Programs here at Lincoln Center. And I want to let you all know we're in our 47th season of Lincoln Center Out of Doors. We just completed our first week. We've got 2 more weeks to go. And if you're not familiar with Lincoln Center Out of Doors, I'll let you know that it started in the early 70s by Leonard DePar. And at the time, Mr. DePar was the Director of Community Relations for Lincoln Center. And from the start, Lincoln Center Out of Doors was designed to be an inclusive and accessible festival, featuring free performances of street theater, music, and dance. And all of these performances took place outdoors, activating all of the public plazas and the spaces of the Lincoln Center campus. And we try to continue that legacy on even through today. And it's through the Out of Doors Festival that I first got to work with Heidi Latsky. In 2012, we presented a work that she choreographed called GIMP. And that happened just outside of the library at Hearst Plaza. And it was a very beautiful piece, which featured both disabled and non-disabled performers, and it challenged assumptions about beauty and ability. And it was really successful and beautiful and eye-opening to all of us, and we are thrilled to continue the relationship that we started back then with Heidi. After that, she stayed in contact with Lincoln Center, and certainly with me and Lincoln Center Out of Doors, and kept us abreast of what she was working on. And in 2015, we welcomed her again to present a site-specific dance on Josie Robertson Plaza on the occasion of the 25th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act. The work that she presented that year featured wheelchair athletes, and again, it was a beautiful and thought-provoking piece. It really showcased the athletic prowess and dexterity in a way that felt novel and urgent. And then recently, she also started, she did On Display, which Jordana Focompe, who is my associate at the David Rubenstein Atrium, is going to tell you about later, how the genesis of On Display happened. But she just recently, this past Saturday, worked through the support of Dance NYC. We were able to present On Display again at Hearst. It was at Hearst Plaza, but really it was around the reflecting pool, around the Milstein reflecting pool, and hopefully you all got to happen upon it. It was a stunning, stunning visual work. It was fantastic, and it did, as I said, it premiered at the Atrium, and Jordana will tell you more about that. The work featured a range of diverse performers of all ages, ethnicities, genders, and abilities in what Heidi called a living installation. And we're just so grateful to Heidi for bringing her work and her vision to Lincoln Center and for raising important questions about ability, beauty, and diversity. I'm so sorry that I'm going to have to run. It's a Tuesday night, which is supposed to be our night off at Lincoln Center out of doors, which means this is one of 2 talks that we're having tonight. So unfortunately, I do have to run, but I'm so glad to at least get to be here and welcome everybody. I'd like to hand off the mic to Kevin Gotkin, who is the co-founder of the Disability Arts NYC Task Force. Thank you, everybody.
And for folks just coming in, feel free to take any of the empty spaces or chairs that are available.
Thank you. Thanks. So our panelists are going to come join us on the stage, and then I'll introduce them. And while they're getting up here, if there's anything we can do up here to enhance your access, or I'll just invite you to do whatever you need in the space to enhance your access. And if there's something we can do, let us know. So my name is Kevin Gopkin. I am co-founder and co-director of an advocacy organization called Disability Arts NYC. I am delighted to be kicking off this first in a series of conversations with dance makers and dance presenters. So let me introduce you to who's on the stage with me. So right next to me is Jerron Herman. He is development director and a star company member of Heidi Latsky Dance. Next to Jerron is Heidi Latsky, artistic director of Heidi Latsky Dance. Next to Heidi is Jordana Pocombe. Jordana is the director of the David Rubenstein Atrium here at Lincoln Center, just across the way. Next to Jordana is Daniel Soto. He's associate producer of public programming here at Lincoln Center. And next to Daniel is Miranda Applebaum, assistant director of accessibility and guest services here at Lincoln Center. So to kick things off, maybe Heidi, could you open with a little bit of the artistic vision for Heidi Latsky Dance? Maybe talk about the recent performances and what disability and integrated dance is for you.
So I think that I've always, as a dancer and a choreographer, really been interested in social justice issues, but I didn't really know how to fully express it, especially since I came from Bill T. Jones' Arnie Zane, where I kind of learned that dance could be more than just something beautiful and physical. And I would say that since 2006, when I started with Lisa Bufano, who's a visual artist that I worked with, who was also a bilateral amputee, I started to think about redefining beauty and virtuosity. And I think that's been kind of the underlying mission of the company. However, I'm also really interested in rigor and in aspects of endurance. Because as a dancer, I was a real kind of slash and burn dancer, and I was really interested in that intense physicality. Now I have on display where people are still for really long periods of time, and I see that that also has a huge element of endurance, and it takes a lot of rigor, and especially with the installations that we've been doing, the dancers have to be very internal. And when people are all around them taking pictures and there's so much going on, that virtuosity and the beauty of keeping that vulnerability is something that I'm really interested in. I think it's really human. So what did we do this weekend? It was like a dream come true. We were at the Whitney Museum on Friday night, which was very chaotic. It's a free night, and we were also on the High Line. So there were a lot of people, and the installation was spread out over balconies and on the sidewalk. And there was a real feeling like the dancers were getting very isolated, which had its own wonder and magic. Last night, not last night, God, I'm so at Saturday night, we were, as you heard, at Lincoln Center, and it was perfect. For me, the Whitney had dancing inside of the sculpture court. This did not. It had very minimal dancing, and the power of that stillness and the meditative feeling that I know I had watching it for an hour and a half, and people came up to me and said, I'm so calm, and there was a sense, I don't know, it was very special. So I just
Fabulous. So we got kind of a brief history from Jill of the collaboration between Heidi Latsky Dance and Lincoln Center. Is there anything else that we need to know about how that partnership came to be before we kind of dive into the questions? Jordana or Daniel, do you want to kind of set up anything else for us about how this collaboration came to be?
Okay, well, so my name is Jordana. I'm the director of the David Rubenstein Atrium, and if you haven't visited the atrium, I welcome you to please come by. The atrium's actually across the street from the Plaza. It is on between Broadway and Columbus, between 62nd and 63rd Street. It's like a T, so you can enter from Columbus and go through, and otherwise, usually we have people come through Broadway. The atrium itself has been around for about 8 years. I helped open the space and have become the director over the time of it, and I oversee the programming of the atrium. The atrium is a public space. We're open every day of the year, and our mission is to make the arts in Lincoln Center accessible to all. And so if we have that in our mission of accessibility, we have a big mission ahead of us. And so when we look at curating and looking at who we present at the atrium, we really think about who needs to be represented here at Lincoln Center, who isn't being represented, who's being represented, but how can we sustain those relationships all year long? And we have a lot of contemporary components to our work. It is beautiful because all of our programming is free. And so I think, it was many years leading up to the creation of the piece on display in 2015 that we had coffee with Bill Bragan, who was the former director of public programming and was part of the GIMP presentation. And we started talking about Heidi's inspiration for On Display, and I'll let you talk more about that. But it was just such a, dance is really hard to do in the atrium. I worked with dancers for many years before coming to Lincoln Center, and so I'm very thoughtful of their bodies and what happens to them, and being kind floors, and the atrium is stone. So I was, very hesitant to do something that was dance oriented in the atrium. We tried it a couple times and it didn't work. But Heidi's vision was very site specific, and it was really about calling all of our, ideas, our predisposed ideas out. And even that with what can we do with dance in the space. And so it was a challenge for me to hear that and to look at it, and she transformed the space. It was beautiful. It was a complete display of the artist on display from the very beginning all the way down from one side of Broadway all the way down through to Amsterdam, to Columbus. And we really, it was a magical experience that we're really proud to be part of. We did commission the piece towards the development of it, and I know Heidi can talk a lot more about that process too, because it takes a lot to make these pieces. So that's a little bit of the backstory.
Yeah, so this whole conversation series, focuses on dance makers who make integrated and disability dance. So we're going to kind of move into thinking about, possibilities and also obstacles. So, just thinking about this partnership that we have here, what would we say are the kind of features that made this so successful? What was it that needed to be in place? What model here do we have between dance maker and presenter? This kind of for anybody to jump in.
Well, I think one of the things. Is this on? Is it? Okay. one of the things that as an artist I really appreciated is the willingness of Jordana and Bill at the time to really listen to what I wanted to do. And at one point I went in there and I said, I have a dancer who's a wheelchair user, Q, and I said, I really want to suspend him from the ceiling in his wheelchair. And they were like, oh, good idea, but how are we going to do that? And they devised this like kind of box around this hanging wheelchair, which I thought it kind of looked like a cage, and I really didn't want that. So we kind of scrapped that idea. But I wanted different levels, and they were very open to these ideas. Jordana was really clear about the pitfalls of the space, like from other people who had been there. So I was thinking about accessibility. So I had this idea that maybe the sculpture court should go from like one street to the other street, and the audience would be guided through it. Like they can come in from one entrance and go all the way out, and that would keep a flow going for people, especially wheelchair users, to keep space for people. And then we also had a film, which was like a ticker tape of 30, like that Jerron wrote actually, but real people that he watched, and it was physical descriptions in a robotic voice. So you had the visual for people who were deaf, and then we also had the audio for people who were blind. So I felt like within this art installation, we were creating something that was more accessible, right? Would you agree? And some people did stay for the whole 2 hours. But, and then some people just walked right through it.
So I feel like that kind of opens a question for Miranda, who, works in accessibility and guest services. To what extent was, the kind of access features at Lincoln Center, how important was that for presenting this dance?
Sure. Well, I think it's so exciting when you work with a programming team and with an artist that is so open to accessibility and is clearly in the forefront of how they plan their work. So it made it incredibly easy. There was already a plan that Heidi had in place to make it accessible for people who are blind or people who are deaf or hard of hearing. And the space itself, Jordana did an amazing job of making sure that the production team was aware of what needed to happen. And the guest services team was also really strong in that aspect. So that was very little to do with that project. It was a really simple turnkey project.
Jerron.
One thing is that Miranda really is an amazing source, and she keeps all of us being able to maintain accessibility. And I was thinking about with Heidi's piece, we wanted it open, but we also needed to have seats for people who might need seats. And so we made sure that we had space reserved for people. We had to try to find that balance, so not everyone just fought over sitting on the seats, right? So we had to have that. So I think there are little things that we continuously try to have to make sure that we're welcoming everyone.
So I was going to ask Jerron, what was it like to perform this and also work in the development of the company? I mean, how was it, performing at Lincoln Center?
Well, it's been a dream to perform at Lincoln Center as an outsider from California, and so I used to remember thinking about coming to New York and as a young whippersnapper and wanting to be on the Plaza or in the theaters. And so there really isn't a precedent for this kind of programming and this kind of work within New York City, I don't think, in this public arena. So to be a part of a project that is kind of breaking the mold, and then also to understand we're investing in a rich history that is already blossoming at Lincoln Center, both of those things were really wonderful. Artistically, it was really compelling to be a part of the piece from the beginning because I saw growth, I saw how it developed and evolved. I saw the genesis from like an idea about what does it mean to be seen, and then the transfer to actual bodies and actual artists. As I wrote, I was commissioned to write, and personally that drove me into a period of intense investigation of what it means to be looked at and why I would look at someone. I remember when I was preparing the script or the ticker tape, and I was probably like on the R train, and I found myself like so weird about it was weird looking at people and thinking how can I relay their interests or how they're interesting, and then having that reflected back on me, like, well, how do people think I'm interesting, or what about me is going to be compelling enough to be in a script to be produced at Lincoln Center. So there are a lot of different things that were going on in my brain, at least, about what's valid and how do we validate others in art. So at the same time that we're presenting at these, at a high art establishment like Lincoln Center, there is this really relaxed environment that we're entering into and creating, wherein we're saying that there's access for all. So it's been a really complex and glorious experience. Well, so the Genesis is really interesting too, because we started on display kind of out of a utilitarian need to rehearse. The performers who were the first kind of round of performers, we were preparing for the atrium in the studios at 42nd Street. And as a social experiment, I think I came up with it personally.
Wait. We had a video going on the
we did.
digital
We
billboard.
did. We had a digital billboard that for the celebrating the ADA and Heidi Latsky Dance's influence in the ADA, or honoring the ADA. Thank you. We wrote the ADA.
He's rewriting history again.
And a group of us were thinking, like, well, why don't we have this time and we're so into this project, why don't we go outside to rehearse? And it just happened that we were in Times Square. And so we took upon ourselves to take up spot. It was the TKTS booth. And we became sculptors right then and there. And learned firsthand and on the job, like, what it would be like to further the experiment, and it was the start of the grouping, the community that we were building. It started there, and it started out of our willingness to do that.
Well, we were also invited by the mayor's, Commissioner Khaleesi of the Mayor's Office for People with Disabilities to, during Disability Pride Month, kind of do guerrilla art all over the city in all the boroughs, which was really exciting to me because I had been thinking that we're getting people who are already, like we're preaching to the converted when you get people to come into the theater, but what if we could be outside and people would happen on you and then they don't have a choice but to look. And I remember that night, the 6 of you, who was there? 1, 2, 3. Yes, there were 6 of you. And the interesting thing was all of them, this is an integrated company, had disabilities. And I'll never forget it, like all of a sudden people were really, they're taking pictures, and I hear people, there's the Elmos walking around, and there was a guy with a big bow, like a snake, and he was getting pissed off because we were taking his crowd away. And like people would walk by and say, what are they doing? And oh, they're doing yoga. And then this was all one night, and I happened to see a couple, and this woman was crying. And I'm really kind of shy, and I would never talk to somebody like that, but I was so compelled because she kept staying and she was crying, and I went over to her and I said, I'm just really curious why you're crying. And she said, we're here from Maine, we've been seeing shows all weekend, and this is the most moving thing I've seen since I've been here. And I was like my heart was like, oh wow, this is great. So we kept doing it, right? We just kept going anywhere we could think of to expose people to the sculpture court. And I will just talk about the Genesis really quickly. The Genesis came because I was showing a video of GIMP to a room full of presenters, funders, artists at a Creative Capital retreat. And I knew that when I spoke about GIMP, everyone immediately assumed that there were wheelchair users in the piece, because I would say disabled and non-disabled. And so I knew that they wouldn't understand what it was, so I showed a 5-minute video, and I had to talk really fast because I only had 7 minutes. And a museum curator was one of the only people who talked to me afterwards, and he sought me out, and he said, "I'm really sorry to bother you, but I really need to talk to you." And I said, "Sure." And he said, "I'm really ashamed of my response to your video because I was brought up in museums where I see sculptures missing arms, missing legs, and then I see some of your dancers who are also missing arms or missing legs. And I'm ashamed of my response because I'm compelled, but I'm also like taken aback." And I had never heard that before. I had never heard about the shame of an audience. And so I started thinking, and this was in 2009, what if I could create a sculpture court with real people? Initially I thought in the Met, right? Beside these sculptures have real people. I'm kind of glad I didn't do that. I don't think that would have worked, but so when in 2015 this opportunity arose, that's when it came to fruition.
I think that's one of the most compelling things, or one of the things I find compelling about your work, Heidi, is, you're, especially with this past performance at Hearst Plaza at Lincoln Center, it's a public space. On any given day, there's throngs of people who visit our campus to maybe see a performance, or maybe just to look at the campus. And people might know us, for the work that has taken place inside of our theaters in a sort of Western classical tradition of music and dance. And so, watching other people encounter on display this past weekend, you get tourists and people who were not expecting it, and they're taken out of their context, and then asked a lot of really important questions about who deserves to be seen, who deserves to be on our stages and plazas at Lincoln Center. And that's something that I think that Jill earlier was talking about, presenting diverse works, and Jordana too, and you, Heidi, talking about social justice in your work. And I think that is something that behooves us as presenters to ask ourselves all the time, who deserves to be seen on our stages, who is worthy of our audiences and the enormous platforms that we have.
I mean, I'm sorry, I just will add one thing about what happened at the atrium is that when I was pregnant, I felt very objectified, and I felt like people thought I was community property, like people would touch me, and also I encountered people's not liking what that looks like. And we were very fortunate to have a woman from NYU who was, she was 7 months pregnant in that installation. And that became something we consider, like constantly we're looking for. We always look for that very pregnant woman.
Trimester.
Yeah, right. And we've had and she continued to do it. She did it at Skirball and then gave birth, I think, 2 days later. It was just crazy. Anyway.
Yeah, I mean, it strikes me that one thing that makes this partnership so successful is that there's a real resonance between the artistic work, interrogating the publicness of disability, and the mission of public programming at Lincoln Center, which is wonderful. So moving us to obstacles, however, the other side of this question, is what's possible that we see in this collaboration, but also we could ask this as, what were obstacles in presenting this work? Or we could ask it, the other way, which is why don't we see more of this in the metropolitan area? So we could think specifically about this partnership, what needed to be done, what were the obstacles, or why isn't this kind of thing happening more? 2 ways to get into that.
You want to say it?
So we had this conversation earlier today. for physically, it wasn't an obstacle because Heidi's work was very site-specific. And Jill mentioned that too. We were talking a little bit earlier of how Heidi really is thoughtful of what is the space she's using and how to activate that space and transform that space. And so you saw that happen in the atrium, you saw that happen at Hearst Plaza, the reflecting pool. And she comes and looks at the space and really gets to understand and feel what is this venue, what is the space I'm working with, and makes the piece fit within that space. So we didn't have maybe the same obstacles that a proscenium stage might have or something of that sort. But I think one obstacle in making this work is financially being able to make the work, because you had to have a very significant cast to make this. And we have limited funds, even though we're Lincoln Center, and you had a lot of support that made it possible. So.
Yeah, because it's on display anyway. When we first started it, I had to talk to all the dancers and talk about, well, what does this mean to you? Because for us, it was a real social justice movement, and it wasn't possible to pay anybody. And so I had to reach out to the dancers and say, like, while we're doing this, while we're trying to fundraise and we're getting ready to do the atrium, which has limited funds, and I want 35 of you because it will make a huge impact. And we've maintained that 35 a lot, because I feel like if you're going to talk about diversity and inclusion, especially, this is not your typical dance piece, right? I kind of see it more as an art installation that moves a little. We try to represent as many people as we can in terms of age, ethnicity, shapes, tall, short, like traditionally beautiful, traditionally maybe not beautiful. So it's like hopefully expansive in that way. And I think the only way to do that is to have a significant amount of people.
To that point, to that point, again, artistically, it's where are the performers as well. I mean, this piece required 35 at minimum to make a statement about diversity and about the spectrum of humanity that we have at our disposal or in our communities. So, they have, but then we also asked for them to be performers. I mean, vulnerable, open performers, but that was also a quality that is part of our work. We are a professional dance company, so there's this underlying, expectation that it's purely community work because it's dealing with people with disabilities. But that's not our case, because we're professionally trained on the job or in our own processes, and we expect excellence no matter who you are. So with that case, we had to audition still, and we tried to our how we found our performers was still very limiting and hard. I mean, I was part of I was at an audition, and I saw how much it took, and how small the pool really is to be able to undertake this work or take on this work. So that was interesting to see. So the cast that we have, the New York City cast, and as On Display expands out to other cities around the world even, and casts are being populated from their own cities, it's interesting to see how New York City is such a great standard for how we look at On Display and how we think about On Display. And so the first cast is the best cast. It is hard.
Well, that leads us into the next question I had, which is about the touring experience of Heidi Latsky Dance. What have you learned about New York, that's unique? The good and the bad, right? Like, what's possible here that isn't possible in other cities? Or what have you learned from other cities about doing integrated and disability dance, right, that New York doesn't have?
When I first started in 2006, and I knew nothing about the disability community, let alone disability in the arts. I learned that in Europe it was much more evolved than what was happening here. And when Geron talks about community, when we first started integrating people with disabilities into the work, I was pigeonholed by my community, my dance community, I felt, into community work. And it was really distressing to me and a big obstacle, I felt, because I didn't feel like people were curious enough to come and check it out, but they already kind of judged it, prejudged it. And I felt that we were knocking on doors for a very long time. I feel like there's a shift. Thank you to Lane Harwell and Dance NYC, who is kind of the organization that this field really needs and really needed in New York City, because it wasn't happening. And it was happening elsewhere. And that's what I discovered. Like when we would go to Europe, and we didn't go that much, but when we did, it was the work was appreciated on a whole other different level. Whereas here it was different. Yeah. And then in terms of other obstacles, there's definitely, we were just in Athens in Greece, and we had one wheelchair user with us, and Athens is very hilly and really inaccessible. It's a good thing he was very athletic. One big obstacle we've experienced is just interpreters. Interpreters are really expensive, very hard to find, and for me, when I first started working, every time I work with a new disability too, I have a huge learning curve, and I often forget. So there are times, for instance, with Jubal or Alexandria and John, who are deaf, I would forget to talk to the venue in time to get the interpreter. That was my bad, and I had to learn how to do that. And then to find out that it was very expensive, and then there were times when there were no interpreters available. And it's the same thing with working with Krishna, who's here, who is visually impaired, and it's a big learning curve on what we were just doing a fashion show in Hurleyville, and it was kind of like we were actually on this kind of driveway, and she was lost because there were no markers, and it was something that I hadn't even thought about. But then, of course, we had to put tape on the ground so that she would know where to go, and actually it helped everybody. So we're learning.
So what advice do you all have for other dance makers or other dance presenters in how to present, successfully present integrated and disability dance? You could either think about advice sourced from this collaboration, or we have a unique set of roles here, from accessibility to public programming to dance making. What in your kind of capacity in this partnership would you, what have you learned to suggest to others trying to further this field?
I think a lot of what we've been talking about is an openness, and an openness to learn from each other, and to admit where you maybe don't have all of the answers. And so much of this collaboration with Heidi, and so much of what I'm hearing Heidi say also is about that, admitting that kind of vulnerability and acknowledging that, in any type of presenter and artist relationship, there are a lot of challenges and negotiations as you're co-creating this reality, co-creating a performance. And I think it's important to always, be cognizant of one's, vulnerabilities, or maybe blind spots, or areas of expertise that you may not share, but that you can learn from other collaborators.
Yeah, I think my role here, I'm not in a curatorial role, but I do try to advocate as much as possible and be aware of what's going on in the disability community in New York. So I just try to see a lot of work. I really try to go to anything that Dance NYC is doing. I try to have a good understanding of what's going on in theater. And I think the more that I can understand that landscape, the more that I can make good recommendations to our partners in different venues within Lincoln Center. And it also means that I have to understand my institution really well, because Lincoln Center is enormous, and we very often I will see a really interesting piece, or I'll meet a really interesting artist, and I'll approach a curator and they'll say, that's great, but we could only rehearse that for 2 hours at this time because we have this other thing coming in, we don't have space for rehearsals, we can't do this work in this way, so we have to find pieces that are pretty far along and pretty complete too. So I've had to learn a lot from how Lincoln Center works as well. And I think also helping advocate and make connections. I'm also on the Museum Access Consortium, and that's a really interesting group of professionals that are looking to forward arts accessibility. And the best advice we can give is to share each other's audiences and really applaud each other's work, because the more that we're making these connections, the more that the audiences are bigger, and the more that we can advocate in our institutions that there's an audience there to view the work. So I think we should all celebrate and show up and be there and be a number in a seat to count and show how important this work is.
So I think my 2 things of advice is, one is to trust the artist. They know what they're doing. That's why you brought them to your space. I think that's really important. I think that with every artist that we present, we really look to them to make sure that they're happy and that they're getting the work that they wanted to see happen. But I also think is like, make yourself accountable, and to really think about who are you looking to and who are you looking to bring. I think it's really important to question why for each time you bring an artist. Why are you bringing this artist? Why is this important? What is this doing to make this piece, this place, as special as it is? Why? And be able to answer that, because I think it's really easy to book, oh, that one will just happen, and that will be a success. But I think it's always like, why? And I think that with Heidi, it was really easy to say yes to, because she was hitting everything that we're trying to accomplish at the atrium of bringing in, welcoming everyone, making sure that everyone is represented, to make sure that all art forms are represented. And that's really hard, as I mentioned before. And to really push our limitations too. The architects of our space had no idea what the atrium was going to be in terms of a performance space after they came back. So they had an idea, right? They're amazing people who done amazing work. But when they came back and started seeing our space, they started to see how artists continue to push what is our space and to redefine it and to look at it in different ways. And I think Heidi is one of those very special artists who really embraced what this, non-conventional space for a performance is, and made it a really magical night. So I think, again, listen to the artists.
Yeah. Do you two have advice for other integrated and disability dance makers? I was also, maybe to make this more specific, because one thing that I wanted to come back to was, what advice do you have for engaging audiences beyond sometimes the kind of diminished role, like imagination around disability dance? You mentioned earlier that folks sometimes imagine that your work is only doing one thing when actually it's far larger. Do you have thoughts on how to engage audiences, or maybe even train audiences to understand integrated dance beyond their kind of first?
Yeah. I remember the first time we performed GIMP. It premiered in Albuquerque, and it premiered for a lot of occupational therapists were in the audience, because there's a big disability community in Albuquerque. And we had I listen to my artists too, right? Like, there's a big collaboration. And one of the things that Lawrence Carter Long, who was one of the people in my company who's a political activist, you know him, and he was like, yeah, well, it's got to be sexy, Heidi. We can't make anything sentimental. Like, that was like the first rule. And then it was like, okay, now we have to show people what they might not even think about. And so we had that sexy section, and I was with him. It wasn't overtly sexual, but it was, you know, sensual, and we were dancing together. And I remember this occupational therapist, after the piece, came up to me and said, I have never thought of my clients, patients, as sexual human beings. Never. And I was shocked. And so, in answer to your question, I think a lot of our post-performance talkbacks were really helpful, where people could talk to the performers and ask the questions that they're usually really uncomfortable asking. Maybe there's no forum for it. We found that people would stay after the performance and really ask questions. Sometimes the questions were really hard for especially the disabled members of the company, because they were, you know, not educated. And so they were sometimes offensive. But I think that what I learned from people like Lawrence was that you go to where your audience is and you show them the way. You know, you start where they are, and then hopefully through your work and through your engagement with them, that their perceptions will shift. So that's been something we tried to do a lot. With on display, you can't really do that. It's because it's a site-specific public piece of art.
But
Yeah.
I would say that on display as a piece is engaging. It's as though the talkback is happening within
True.
the piece itself. Because when we're, as performers, we're in the space and we have our eyes closed and we're in a big sculptural pose, and we open our eyes and we connect with someone right in front of us. And some people are brave enough to hold that gaze, the audience member and the performer as well. And that silent interaction is the anecdote, which I can't stress enough, is the thing that re-educates us. I have more ideas of disabled people because I've been around more disabled people. I have more stories of interactions with different types of art forms because I've expanded how many art forms I've seen. The anecdote is extremely powerful because it loosens up our personal histories and gets us out of our own trajectory, because something has, and that's what I love about this piece, because you hap upon it. Mostly you don't know it's happening, you're just going to lunch and something's happening during your lunch time. And though we try, like Heidi said, we try to go toward the people that, you know, we want to bring them in, we're actually really interested in the passersby and the unsuspecting, because those are the people that are unsuspecting, you know, who aren't conscious or woke or trying to be, and yet if there is a point where we can get them to a place of just understanding that there is a difference and that they need to challenge their difference and they need to see something beyond themselves, then that's really a quality experience, and I think that's going to be the thing that is the art.
And I guess for advice, for dance makers, I would say I think it's really important to keep it rigorous and hold yourself to a super high standard, because I think that's the way the work is richer, the experience, the art encompasses so much more and operates on different levels. And I think that's what we've tried to do, really, really, in everything we do. There has to be a certain rigor, whether it's how you inhabit your body and the space on display, and you stay true and authentic. That's really hard. It's really hard. Or whether it's what we're doing right now for Victory Dance, which is an integrated cast, like dancing in chaos, kind of, because it's a small space with a lot of movement, and navigating that space with efficiency and artistry.
So last question here before we open it up for questions from the audience. We've kind of said that your work with Heidi Latsky Dance does not only, it's beautiful artistic work. It doesn't only do social justice work. It can't be reduced to that. But in what ways does this collaboration support what we would understand to be disability rights? Because so often, disability arts and culture are kind of set apart from disability rights. Is there a way that there's a connection here between the artistry and especially now in a quite a prickly.
Yeah.
He's so nice. I'm trying to be moderator, but we live in an extremely ableist time. And so in what ways does this collaboration help support quests for justice that have been going on?
As a performer, the Atrium was extremely educative because, and then any space that we do on display in, I'm just keyed into where we do these performances, because in some ways, wherever we do this piece, there's this understanding that it is accessible because of the nature of what it is and who's a part of it. So you've already said to the community that this space is accessible and open. So it's almost as though we're, low-key whistleblowers to inaccessible spaces. And so that's been a really exciting offshoot of the work, which is because of the nature of the piece, it's not intended to be something that points to infrastructure, but it happens to do that just by the nature of its roots and its whatever.
I also think that what the performers are being asked to do is whatever they want, in a way, within the very strict, it's very simple rules of the improvisation, but it's all about them choosing their movement. They can just lie down if they want. They can, there are parameters, but it's really about them owning who they are in that moment. And I think audiences get that, and I think that's really important. We've been talking to City College, and he was very interested in On Display. And in City College, there's a lot of immigrants. And so I was saying, why don't we do a resistance on display? And actually, DJ was part of this too. On display, and use that community so that they can have agency and they can be out there saying, hey, I'm here. Take a good look, right? Because that's what we're doing. We're giving people what we call a safe place to stare. And then the viewer becomes the viewed becomes the viewer, because as you're walking through the installation, like as Jaron said, you could be looking at Jaron, his eyes are closed, so it's kind of safe. And then he opens his eyes and you're being viewed, the audience person. So it kind of switches it all up.
I do have one other fact.
Yeah.
I know that on display in the disability community can seem, or being on display as a person with a disability can seem hard, because that's what we do every day. Is we are seen and we're at the mercy of someone else's stare. So to redouble in a piece, in a dance piece, is hard. But I think that the agency, we can't diminish the agency that, singular piece is giving, but also just like the diversity of disability artistry that can happen and is a part. I think that that's really valuable, that this piece doesn't have to funnel into an identity of disability arts that is like, oh, that's all disability arts is, but it can represent an aesthetic that would I think offer up that disability arts is multifaceted and doesn't have just one blip or one singular voice, but it has multi voices that each pertain or each speak to all the diversity that's within disability in general. So to that point, there's diversity within disability arts, which I think speaks to disability rights as potential.
But you also told me once, and I want you to say it, not me, because I'm going to ruin it.
I'll say.
Do you know what I'm talking about? That when you said the disability community is part of the larger community.
Oh, yeah. Most definitely.
Okay.
If we think about disability as part of race and as part of gender and as part of immigration status, then we won't segment it anymore. It won't have to be what's your disability play. You know, it won't have to be what's your disability dance, what's your disability book. It won't have to be that, and it also won't have to be who's your disabled performer. It will be who's your performer, and I think that that's going to be the change, and it comes within how we think about how just the diversity of people that we're using. It's not, you know, we have to think about the foundational aspect of who we're using and or who we're engaging and who we're bringing in, and not the what I would call the kind of superficial elements that, you know, speak to status quo. I think there's a place for that, but I also think that if our intention is to invest in diverse people, then we'll hit the mark of we're including everyone. At least I think that might be a little bit utopian, but.
No, I think it's.
So why don't we open the floor for questions? How should we do the microphone? Do this one? Okay, great. So before we do that, so think about questions. I just wanted to recognize someone in the audience. Earlier, Lane mentioned that the city just released its first ever cultural plan. And the commissioner of the Department of Cultural Affairs, which is the agency that put that together, is here with us. Jonathan Gopal is here. Some of the things that we talked about, I was trying to play moderator role in that chiming in, but some of the things we talked about, like support for public art and support for the cost of access, are things that are addressed in the plan. So it's kind of a really exciting time, although we're talking about a collaboration that just happened and kind of began years ago. Thinking about the future of disability arts, this plan will be really important in supporting disability artistry. And like Lane mentioned, disability arts is really prominently featured in this plan. So I encourage you all to go read it and to thank the commissioner for his wonderful work. So questions. We have about 15 minutes, yeah? So.
So does anyone have questions? And remember, if you'd rather submit your question via email, you can do so at the email deatownhall@dance.nyc.
As a multimedia artist and a disabled performer, I've wanted to kind of dig into this idea of rigor and the fact that certain ideas of rigor, especially within performance, are not very inclusive. Like when I perform, you know, because I want people to confront my body in a way that does not allow for escape. And in my process, I also want to not make myself disposable. And I guess what I'm asking is, do we mean the same things when we say things like rigor? Has that been unpacked at all? How could the idea of rigor possibly be expanded to transform disabled people from non-performers to performers?
It's a really good question. What? Mars? What?
Oh, you have to answer that.
I have to. I think we have unpacked rigor. I think I've had to really think about it very specifically for every person I've worked with. You know, so when I worked with Lisa Bufano, she was the first person with a disability I worked with. She had no lower legs and no fingers, and she was the most beautiful dancer I have ever worked with. She's the one who taught me what I looked for in a dancer. She taught me that I was looking for people who were open, vulnerable, and fierce. And it was those qualities, and also she was she had this beautiful fluidity. And what happened with her was that the first rehearsal, and hopefully this may answer your question. I didn't know what I was doing, so I gave her an arm phrase, and I had her sit on a chair, and she had her prosthetics on. It wasn't very interesting, and that's what we did. I never met her, so I was watching her do the arms. And then I went home, and I thought, gee, what am I going to do? I don't know. She's so limited with those prosthetics, and they were she had a bunch of prosthetics with her. And the next day, I came to rehearsal, and she didn't have them on. And she was moving through the space, and I happened to see her moving through the space through the window, and I went, oh my gosh. And I made this section of this 25-minute solo to an aria in 1 hour. And it was just, I saw something in the way she moved her body that I loved and that I could relate to, and I pushed it. Like it was the central part of that solo. And then I kept working that way without her prosthetics, not knowing that it was terrifying her. She really relied on those prosthetics. I didn't know that. She didn't tell me that. So I just kept going, right? Because that's what I'm going to do. And we kept exploring throughout this solo all these different things she could do. And I was throwing her off balance, and she was saying, that's really hard for me because I've had to learn how not to drop this coffee cup. And now you're telling me to move my ribs, right? Which is going to throw my body with. But she did. And we kept pushing it. And then it was only towards the end where she said, I really want to do a section with my running legs. And so we added that. But to me, her virtuosity was in her body, not without the prosthetics. And so that's what I mean by rigor. With Lawrence Carter Long, this is years ago, right? With GIMP, he came in and I did the same exercise because I didn't know what I was doing. So I said, stretch your arms. And he stretched them like this. And so I just kept saying, Lawrence, just keep stretching them. And that's when I noticed his wingspan was huge. So we kept developing that. And then I asked him, what do you do really well? And he said, I fall really well. So then I asked him to fall a lot. And that became this piece, Two Men Walking, which, was pushing his physicality as much as I could. Does that answer your question?
I do want to add, the second half of your question was about how to transform a non-disabled, or a non-performer into a performer. Is that true?
Right.
And I didn't start off as a performer at all. And in fact, I think there's a really big correlation between, for me, I see willingness to perform and then the time that you did not perform as really kind of correlate. Like, there's something there. For me personally, I really enjoyed the aspect of discovering all of my body, and from someone who was not disabled, that's a point. It took Heidi and then another person, a non-disabled person, to say that oh, you might be a dancer. For me, at least, so that's my experience. So it's very complex for someone else outside of my composition to tell me that I'm a dancer. So within that, I pause at what does it take? What does it? How do you identify, or how do you get to that identification? I'm really impressed by people who come up with it themselves, because I wouldn't have. And so when I was training on the job, I learned what attendee was in the studio, and I learned how to use my ribs on the way to a performance. So there was never a place where I wasn't trying to be engaged, or the rigor was that I had to learn it pretty effectively in a short period of time. I grew up in an environment, especially with physical therapy and occupational therapy, where your body is, you use your body efficiently, or as efficiently as possible. There was no talk of art in physical therapy. So now that I'm using my body as art, it's a different quality, wherein I'm not so precious about my body as I was when I was in physical therapy, which is interesting, because the goals are the same, you know? So it's a really, I think it's still a very interesting question. I'll still be thinking about it.
I just want to add one thing to that. I think what fascinates me when I'm working with people who've never performed, who've never danced, is to go into what is unique about them. And my old producer used to say that what I would do is mine that uniqueness and then pull it, tweak it, enhance it, so that, and that's what I'm really interested in. And then when you talk about the training question, it becomes such another complex issue, right? How do you train for that? Because you don't want the image of a dancer to get in the way, right? Because a dancer image, a lot of times dancers I have found, and myself included as a dancer, had all these images of what I should look like instead of really feeling my body and working with my body to explore how I was going to dance. But that's in the training, right? So that's in the training. Phyllis.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad that you mentioned the process of learning on the part of creators, performers, and the audience. I've had a somewhat similar experience in working with the Cooper Hewitt Museum, whose senior curator, Ellen Lupton, is creating an exhibit called The Senses Beyond Vision. And in addition to addressing including products that and spaces that not only address other senses, she's invited people to write about products and solutions that serve people with impairments in one of the senses. I've had the honor of writing about sight impairment and interviewing people. And the interesting thing, the nice thing that has come from this, before the exhibit opens in April 2018, is that I sent my article to a neighbor whom I met in the laundry room, who happens to be a product manager at OXO, who designs housewares. And she has already said that she enjoyed reading it, and it does an excellent job of giving the reader an encompassing view into the lives of those without sight. It is fascinating to hear about all the workarounds people have come up with. It definitely is giving me inspiration to consider this perspective as I design housewares on my job. So the communication, the learning of the person who's researching or creating that movement, and the public, the exchange is happening, and I thank you for what you're doing, and we all need to expand in whatever areas we're interested in.
Thank you. Phyllis is one of my first dance teachers.
I have a couple of things. In the last part of the conversation, in reference to this young woman's question, and you're describing how you work with the women who had, I don't know, hands or things or whatever. It's always whatever. If you consider motion is the engine for creative thinking, acting, and being, and found a way to remove dance, the word, from the concept of enhancing physicality that is not in the range of our bodies today. Because if you go back in time, the caveman did not have a big brain. He had a little thing in the back of his spine, and it was small, and that grew into our head and made us think a lot. in your descriptions, you move. And if people who are not availed of the facility that we're used to seeing with our eyes, the injection of motion as a food and a sensation, and the impulses of their body can be brought alive, then a new era would occur, and people would not look at them as different. Because the word dance, I personally object to, is a stigma.
I agree.
A wonderful concept, or a renewed concept of a human state of being.
Yeah. I think that's so interesting, and I don't even, especially with on display, it's an installation, it's not dance, and I actually have to keep dance out of it because I wouldn't get any volunteers to do it. So when we do it, we have a global initiative, or when we were just at the American Dance Festival and we were looking for people in the community to get that diversity, if I put dance in there, we'd be very limited as to who would respond. But what we're in agreement with you, what I find really fascinating, and I found fascinating for the last 10 years, is the essence of someone's movement and bringing and having them move in their way, that motion, right? And then if you integrate it with people who have that kind of really technical training, some really interesting things happen.
Oh, yes, it's
Really interesting.
It's
Yeah.
sensory perception, which is not really taught in the curriculum of
Dance. And that's a whole other discussion that the disability, people like in the disability dance community, training is a huge issue. I have lots of ideas about it. I am developing a technique right now which hopefully helps with that motion. It's not typical at all. But it's taken me a long time to figure it out. Yeah, it's taken me a long time to figure it out.
70 years.
We have one question from the email. And I'm
Oh,
going to take this.
all right.
The one that works. Thanks. This is a question submitted by email for our folks from Lincoln Center. In your work, what changes have you seen in the way Lincoln Center is being more intentional about accessibility and connecting audiences to disability arts, and what changes are you currently pushing for now?
Thank you. I am so heartened and excited at the collaborations with Heidi especially and the great work in the Atrium. The Atrium also is part of the Real Abilities Film Festival, so that's been a really exciting way to bring artists with disabilities and in the film genre here. One thing that's really exciting is that the resident organizations on campus are thinking about disability in a new and different way in the time I've been here for about 4 years. So we're getting approached in our department more and more with how to make their spaces and diversify their audiences at the ballet, the Metropolitan Opera, at the Film Society, all over campus. That's really wonderful to hear. I think the next step and the step that we're pushing, the work that's going on at Dance NYC is really pushing is how we can think about the work on our stages beyond our audiences. And I think that's the piece that we're working to support more and more. And one thing that our department has started in collaboration with our Human Resources Department is how we can diversify our staff to represent more voices, generally, and specifically voices in the disability community. So we're starting super, super small, so we don't have a ton to report on yet, but we started an internship program with high school students, mostly on the autism spectrum in District 75 schools, so that they can work in front of house. So that works on social skills, that works on teamwork and community, a lot of the goals that they have in their IEPs, but it also opens them up to a wider world. You know, we're working with a school in Flushing that rarely comes to Lincoln Center or comes to Manhattan. And I think that it's also really exciting for our staff to see many of them have loved ones with disabilities in their lives, and they don't think about careers in the arts for them for a variety of reasons. We do a ton of programming for families and people with disabilities, and it means a lot when we invite our families in with, a 5-year-old who's newly diagnosed with autism and see someone working in front of house who's on the spectrum and displays some of the behaviors that our child sees. I think that means a lot to show a pipeline and direction they can go in. So I think these are the very small projects that we're hoping to grow over time here.
That's great.
I'm curious for everyone on the panel about the ways in which you all are trying to work to move beyond sort of transactional change, beyond mere representation, and beyond solely providing services in a way that's actually transformational, in a way that's targeting some of the root of the everyday violence and ableism. And I see a lot of things where people will have a disabled artist and then put them on their brochure, or talk about how they're giving things to disabled people without considering the contributions that disabled people are bringing to the organization. And people using languages of extraction, of I mined this from them, or these kinds of things that I'm curious about you all's thoughts on going beyond the sort of transactional dynamic, service provider dynamic, into something that's hitting me.
I will say something to that. So when I talked about mining the unique attributes of my dancers, I do that with every single dancer. This is not specific to people with disabilities. That's my role as a choreographer. I've worked with many choreographers who want me to do exactly what they do. And then I worked with Bill and Arnie, who asked me to develop material, who pushed me to be more athletic when I wasn't athletic, and to think about my role as a woman in the company, things that I didn't really want to. And so having that kind of education, that's my legacy. That's where I come from. That was my training ground. That's what I do with all my dancers. This is not, we're integrated in a sense, but I feel like I treat everybody with the same way. That's my goal, because I'm looking for the same, it's my art, and I think it's really important. We got a review once that said, clearly this choreographer thinks that anyone can dance and everyone is beautiful. And I was kind of offended by that, because it assumed that because I had people, different kinds of people than they expected on stage, that I felt that I could work with anybody and that everyone was beautiful. That is not true. It is not true. I'm very selective about who I work with. There has to be a dialogue, there has to be an openness, and I have to be able to do what I would do with any dancer to bring my choreography to life. And in my case right now, what I've been playing with mostly is bringing their language, their bodies to life. And I don't think that that's representational. I think it has depth. And actually, it's hard. I have dancers crying, I have dancers angry at me, we work really hard, things are said, because we go as deep as we can in the process.
I've worked with dancers in a different life before coming to Lincoln Center, and all choreographers make their dancers cry. So, and they push all of their artists to extremes and try to find out what that piece is that they're looking for. I think it's important to be honest. I think what you're seeing with Heidi is she's really honest of where she's made mistakes. And nobody here on this panel is an expert. We're all just have the intention to make sure that what we're doing on our stages is the best, and who we're representing, both on our stages and our staff, and who our audience is, really is indicative of who is New York City. And it's not just one particular community. New York City is all of these communities. And I thought what you were saying was so beautiful. It's not like the disability community is separated from all the other communities. It's an integrated, we are all part of our different communities, and I wear many different hats throughout the day, and somebody who has one disability wears a different hat throughout the day. And I think, Miranda, you have said in the past, or I can't remember who it was, it's like, we're all just one step away from a disability. Like anyone, it's all part of our community. You can step off this stage and be a different person next, depending on what I do with my body. So I think that it's about being honest and showing where we make mistakes, and being brave to show where we make mistakes as well. I'll choose 2 seconds, but I think it's important that we be open and our spaces be open, and I think it's really that we have a responsibility as presenters to make sure that we are thoughtful in who we bring to our space. So please.
I'm not asking a question as much as I'm responding to one of the questions that was asked. I guess as one of Heidi's performers, and as a performer more generally, there was a distinction made earlier between work that furthers disability rights and disability arts, which I think is a really false distinction. I would argue that some of the greatest advances in the perception of people with disabilities have come from disability arts and disability culture. I've been thinking about like the work of Frida Kahlo, thinking about these kinds of transformative cultural moments. And I guess my response to the question about what are we doing besides representational art, or besides merely increasing visibility and sort of tokenizing inclusion, what I think at its best On Display is doing is redefining aesthetic values and offering people to consider beautiful asymmetries and unique textures, and really challenging the ways that bodies move through space. One of the things that was beautiful at the reflecting pool the other night was how our bodies and our costumes and our angles and our poses align with the architecture around us. I think there is, and we talk about representation and we talk about inclusion, but at its best, what I think the point of On Display is in a lot of ways, is to provoke the viewer to think about their own aesthetics and their own aesthetic values. And if we were to deconstruct, if we were to take apart the social constructions of beauty, what does each viewer individually find beautiful and engaging? And I think, more to the point, I think another thing that it does, you spoke about honesty. I think Heidi keeps talking about authenticity and our unique movement, and I understand how people are hearing that as ableist, but I think what she's talking about is at this moment, here we are in Trump's America, right? Where people are extremely closed off. People are afraid, people are paranoid, people are rigid, are extremely rigid. And I think it's about moving from the heart, opening from the heart, and presenting the most sort of authentic, vulnerable, and raw self. At least which I would argue that that's much more than representational.
So thank you for coming. So we're gonna have the master class is gonna be happening in the lobby. Alejandra explain that. I just ask you to help me thank our panelists for a wonderful.
Thank you so much for coming, everyone. We're passing around some surveys. If you can please tell us what you think about our talk today and
how we can continue to make this kind of work better. We have the masterclass happening now from 8 p.m. to 9 p.m. in the lobby. If you registered or did not, you're welcome to come, either participate or observe. If you are not interested in staying for the masterclass and wish to step out, you're welcome to kind of linger through the space if you want to continue the conversations or connect with the speakers. And you are welcome to use the exit here to my left. Thank you so very much for coming. The cafe is also still open, so feel free to get some refreshments and have a wonderful evening.